Hello there, dear listener. We hope you're enjoying this lovely discussion. If you're not already aware, this show is part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio, a Pan-African Nationalist and Garveyite network committed to showcasing the rich and varied thoughts of African people. We have an exciting lineup of shows that we think you'll enjoy, including
the Bitter Medicine Podcast.
I think black people acquire too much buy-in. Like, we constantly have to sell black people on things that are beneficial to black people.
The Pro-Black Perspective Podcast.
I'm fearful that our people are not really studying how to get ahead, and we're kind of, continually staying behind.
The Harsh Reality Podcast.
To me, it don't matter. I think people are so dumbed down, it wouldn't matter what you reveal to them. They still are in the matrix. They're in the simulation. They're going to keep doing what they did. They lemmings. So to me, it don't matter, man.
The Learning Curve Podcast.
Sexual access has never given you economic empowerment. The only person who has ever been economically empowered by a sexual relationship is the wasp and his woman.
The Cathedra Cheek Show.
When we start rising up to fight for our own, I guarantee you they'll stop doing what they're doing. I guarantee you they would have let their brother go. They was waiting to see what black folks was going to do.
Brother Bakari Podcast.
Black people love to claim folks that hate them, right? They're a slave master, and they are ashamed of who they really are.
The Forecast Radio.
Like, if you pray to the same deity as like your enemy, and that God blesses your enemy more than you may want to reconsider who you praying to,
And Tanzan, African Mind.
Africans generally are welcoming of everyone. Sometimes, to my consternation, I think that they should be less, welcoming.
If you love our podcast network, we would be grateful if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on social media, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out our website at www.kwazradio.com for more information. Thank you for tuning in. And now, back to the program.
All right. Peace, family. Peace. You're tuning into the Pro-Black Perspective, obviously. We're going to finish this book on African science. I don't know if it's really science, honestly. A lot of things happening right now, though. Apparently some white boys making a noise on the Discord. So, but I think actually white girl, maybe. I don't know. I'll try to entertain them later. And then what else is there? Oh yeah, somebody sent me a message. I don't know. But we're going to just finish this book, and then we're going to get back into the real world. So thanks everybody for joining me, everybody who's here, everybody who's not here, or who'll come back later. Let's just enjoy the end of this book. Now, it looks like a lot of pages. I'm not going to hold you. So we're going to just try to go quickly. So, Chapter 11, Schools of African Science. There are two rival schools in African science, namely the Transcendentalists and the Mechanists. The Transcendentalists hold that the goal of science is to provide a true description. Actually, let me just double check that my audio is working. Yeah, okay. The Transcendentalist holds that the goal of science is to provide a true description of a certain part of the world, namely the material and the anti-material worlds. They hold that the non-material world, the source of motion and scientific inspiration, cannot be adequately described by science, since to do so, scientific knowledge must not only perceive but also be independent of the non-material world. This is not the case. The Transcendentalists prefer to treat claims about the non-material world as epheomimi, mystery. On their side, the Mechanists hold that the goal of science is to provide a true description of the world as a whole. So already we see, like, we're reminded of this paradigm of, well, there's a non-material world and anti-material world. Now, again, if you don't have proof to a non-material world, you don't have a non-material world. And I know the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. But at the same time, it's like, don't waste your time. There's too much at stake in this universe for you to. It's like the religious people. They're like, hey man, God says, be multiply and be fruitful. If you do not, if you really have no communication with this so-called deity, then this deity didn't say that. Now, to multiply and be fruitful, is that a good idea? Absolutely. Okay, is that a good idea? Absolutely. However, can you definitively say that that was a in extraterrestrial communication? No. Could you say the authority is on an extra? No. And of course, to multiply and be fruitful is not actually universally objectively good. You know, at least of all for a whole community. You know, we don't necessarily know the extent to genetics, but there can be bad genetics. There can be bad genomes. In fact, I'll tell you this: if you are interested in a relationship with a woman or a man or whatever, right? I mean, assuming you're interested in reproduction, you're interested in reproduction. At least in America, or, maybe some other states, some other countries, but they will test you genetically to see if you have any sort of preconditions that you may in fact multiply, and then they will strongly discourage you from giving from reproducing. And I'm not saying that that's an absolute thing that they will do, but a lot of times they do test you for your genetic profile, especially if you exhibit some sort of deformities, if you will. I remember this. Uh, Not to say that I was tested per se, but I could say that um, I did speak with people who were tested, and they did seem like they were, on the spectrum, and they assured me, hey, look, I'm not on the spectrum, or I can't pass on any sort of genetic, mishaps because look, my doctor taught me, the doctor showed, um, which is, already, but I mean, I'm saying that it's not a universal, truth that you should multiply, not to say that, um, not to say that, again, it's just not a universal truth. Um, there are genetic mishaps. There are people who are not people at the end of the day, um, and whether that's better or worse, really comes back to what's your stance on evolution versus creation. You see, and if you're saying, well, um, because essentially, realistically, humans were not created the way we are today. You know, and not just that, but through a sort of planned birthing process, humans can become a totally different entity. But of course, I did say I wanted to do the rush, so let's let's go forward. So another contentious point is that the transcendentalists, in a way, identify Akara Muo thought, which inhabits the non-material world, with what they call Chi Uku, literally translates as big God. For them, it is the Chiuku who is the source of all motion, the dictator of time, the maker of space, and the beginner of scientific inspiration. So apparently, God's influence science and move everything. There can be no science without Chiuku, and of course, no material and anti-material world. The mechanists object to some of these accounts. Akada Mu, for them, is not divine or godlike. It is not even animate, as the transcendentalists wish to have it. It is an attribute of Akada Obi, mind. It is Akada Mu, which activates motion among realities through the production of ideas. So they're saying it's actually mind, mind controls thought, as opposed to thought being controlled by a god. They do not hold as a transcendentalist that the material and anti-material worlds were created by Chiuku, whose abode is the non-material world. The world for them are uncreated realities. The non-material world is not an abode of some beings, but a characterization of the attribute of Akara Obi. It offers simple explanations about science's own activities from the metaphysical standpoint. The transcendentalists, at an extreme point of view of science, At an extreme point of view, science as a form of religion and the scientific laws and theories as the creeds of this religion. The masters of this religion is Chiuku, and his believers are the working scientists. The goal of this religion is to bring intellectual and technological salvation to mankind, tapping the resources available in both the material and the anti-material worlds. Chiuku, who dwells in the non-material world, is the maker of the material and anti-material worlds, as well as the provider of motion and scientific inspiration. So he's repeating himself. But the mechanists accuse the transcendentalists of religionizing science. There are no deities in science, no dogma, and no religion. What there are simply theories, laws that some are laws, though some are metaphysical laws and natural forces. What the transcendentalists practice is not science, but a system of worship. Thus, the mechanists see themselves as the only school of science in African science. The transcendentalists are mere impostors, prophets, and priests of the old African religion who wish to remain relevant in the new order of systematized African science. So he's getting some beef, I guess. I don't know. The mechanists also object to the transcendentalist claim that Chiuku is in possession of all possible scientific knowledge and has demonstrated them all in the natural world. This makes Chiuku the master scientist of the first scientist, or the first scientist whose handwork the human scientists only imitate. There is no technology built by men that was not already in existence in nature. Thus, the human scientist is not an ingenious inventor. He is merely a copycat or an intelligent imitator of the works of Chiuku. The mechanists, on the contrary, see men as ingenious scientists who have greatly transformed the docile universe into a sophisticated piece of machine. Without the scientists, the world would still remain docile, dormant, and inactive. It is therefore the position of the mechanist that the world is uncreated, but the evil genius, the human scientist, could destroy it. But the transcendentalists hold that the world is not some chance occurrence, it is the work of Chiuku, and like a good artist, he would not destroy the work of his genius, neither would he allow the human scientist to do so. So, this is a bit of a philosophical quarrel. Obviously, if any side is correct, it's the mechanist. But it's still a little bit interesting. Oh, here's what's interesting about this. So in ancient Egypt, right, ancient Kemet, you had Tahuti. Tahuti, a lot of the early discoveries of the ancient Egyptians are attributed to Tahuti. Now, I think, well, I mean, look, some would say this is a little more on the conspiracy theory side, but I think there were predecessor states to ancient Egypt. Okay? A lot of people are of the opinion that there had to have been predecessor states, and not just Kush, but like predecessor states from way back before Egypt, only because the first dynasty of Egypt is so impressive. You know? So, what do I mean by the first dynasty of Egypt is so impressive? Um, so they're building these pyramids. They're building like these megalith pyramids. They're constructing supreme cities. They're advanced in their mathematics. Okay, and by advanced in their mathematics, now today you might not say it's too advanced, but it's like calculus level mathematics for a people with like in their first dynasty. Okay, so to put into comparison, it's like if you go to a village in Africa right now, they are, for the most part, not building megalith works. They're not master mathematicians and physicists and so on and so forth, for the most part. Okay, and I mean by physicists, I mean like their own language, fully developed language, writing, mathematics, physics, philosophy, theology. They're not doing this on a village level. But if they were doing this on a village level, you would think, okay, something probably like was before that. A case in point was when we went to, so I can say it now. We went to Mbeya, and we went to see some of the like the villages. I don't think I took videos of the villages, but a lot of us noted that a lot of the housing was really developed. Like a lot of the housing looked really good and developed. And that's a thing. It's like, what do you expect from? I mean, of course, this is 2023, but even so, like you got to remember that in the ancient world, when you're talking about housing, a lot of them had really immaculate stone apartments, like 2-floor stone apartments, which is just it's honestly a lot. Now, obviously, it's not as much as what you might be living in if you're in the Western world, but it's still pretty impressive for a first dynasty. Okay, And the first dynasty just means like this is the first year that the city was in existence. So you have to think that maybe there was an influx of people from a earlier civilization, which is what I consider. But again, some people reason that that is on the conspiracy theorist side. That um, um, people like Clyde Winters is not really um, verifiable or verified. But I still, I'm still partial to his studies. But anyway, so let's keep going. The metaphysics of African experimental science. So, experiment in science roughly involves testing both indoor and outdoor of the claims of scientific theories. It is a way to ascertain whether a given hypothesis actually describes the world as claimed. If the juice from pawpaw leaves is said to be an antibacterial solution, for example, the bacteria that causes typhoid, the scientist isolates these bacteria and then exposes them to the solution in a controlled environment. If the result is confirmed, then he goes on to the next stage. He introduces the bacteria into the body of a living organism and administers the solution in a controlled dosage. If the result is successful, then he moves even further in what is called clinical trial and administers the solution to some selected human guinea pigs. But before all these, he studies the chemical components of the solution and compares it with the biological makeup of the bacteria. Now, all these processes are lacking in the mainstream practice of African science. Hitherto, this systemization. The part essence of this advocacy, it seems, is to bring African science up to speed by adopting and adapting some of the obvious giant strides in Western science. So, Western science has obvious giant strides. The pharmacologist of the old African sciences relies on a method of SEM, science, interscience, and introscience. He reaches an arbitrary decision on the basis of any choice method of what to use as a cure for any new disease. If it works, then he is a genius. If it does not, he simply moves on. The danger then is that there is no sophisticated means of studying diseases, bacteria, viruses, or the chemical components or solutions of pretrial or clinical trial or dosages of side effects. Western science was at this level prior to the scientific revolution. The problem with African science, it seems that it never lived to witness scientific revolution. It was all about belief, superstition, and raw metaphysics. So he's talking about now, like, he's actually talking about real science, but he's saying that we didn't have a scientific revolution. However, even after the systemization, metaphysics looks quite hard to wish away from the mainstream practice of African science. Let us roughly conceptualize metaphysics as that discourse which has no basis in empirical explanation. In other words, we can talk about metaphysical entities, we may even claim understanding, but we cannot demonstrate such if required. Now, science as a meta-narrative has certainly in actuality, as its basic canons. If what? If there are two if these two are its ship and sail, demonstration becomes the wind in the sail. If metaphysics is a storm, superstition would be a tempest, and no sailor needs these two. So he's like, metaphysics is like we're burdened by superstition and metaphysics, but we should really have demonstration. Like demonstration is the most important. And this is what demonstration really is. Like this is where we come into this 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 religious talk. It's like, can you demonstrate whatever it is you're praying about? And I mean, some people, can you demonstrate? Absolutely. Because some people could say easily, hey, look, I pray to this deity and I live pretty well. You know what I mean? And therefore, this deity provides for me, right? And that's fine. But is that absolute? Is that an absolute proof? Because, on the other hand, you have people who also pray to the same deity and they live pretty miserably. Quite the majority, in fact. In fact, they say that some people even try to correlate poverty with religiosity. I mean, I don't think religiosity and poverty are correlated per se, but to a large extent they seemingly are. So it's that's another. So it's just like, how do you demonstrate like that this faith is worthwhile? That's the thing that a lot of people are not, because again, one of the biggest demonstrations to whether pre-colonial Africa, like the faiths in pre-colonial Africa were worthwhile was colonization. If you were colonized, we feel like, well, it wasn't the best. It wasn't the best resistance to colonization. So the African science of old is based on superstition, but then the old Western science is based on myth, right? True. Though many philosophers of science contend that science never really emerged until the scientific revolution, but that could be outlandish. Such a view is granted that Africa never had a scientific experience, and which is worse, this project would be nonsensical. So, uh, again, this is not a counter argument, but it's like okay, maybe this project is nonsensical. But anyway, but I mean, it's fine. I think it's fine to try to document something um, we've experienced historically. I don't think it's worthwhile to categorize it as a science. Not to say that some of this stuff is not science, because obviously if they're doing experiments and demonstrating theories, then that's science. But I mean, I just don't think that you should be calling it that. But we could continue. But we know that in the beginning was science, and science was with man, and science has been with man. So again, how do we know this? What do you mean? How could the early man become the food gatherer scavenging for survival if he has no science? Again, what are you talking about? How could the ancient man forge civilizations after another if he had not this knowledge? Now, this is true. But perhaps we can validly argue that science has come to attain sophistication through the passage of time, but not that it only just emerged. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Let us roughly and broadly conceptualize science as a progressive knowledge generated on man's contact with the world. Here, the only condition left is that for any meta discourse to qualify as science, it must be forward looking or attempt to account for the progress of men in their quest for survival in the harsh world. Technology merely became a way to make this knowledge more precise, more accurate, and more justifiable. Justifiability is a demand for empiricality, which only becomes a standard in modern science as a way to take care of man's inherent limitation. Men are sensual beings whose enormous ability to perceive distinctly meant that they are incapable of going beyond their senses. Their strength, therefore, becomes a weakness. Perhaps another way of looking at the demand for empiricality as we see today in science may be to view it as a stellar weakness. But then, since science is for man and not the other way around, thinking of science as better done empirically is tenable. However, to confine it to empirical measures is not only impossible but myopic. It should be noted that the world is not for man alone, and many are the fragments of nature that are useful to man but not empirical to him. If he could exploit the non empirical energies and forces for his own good, should he be written off as a magician? The electrons and protons, and indeed all the subatomic particles, count in this number. The realists of Western sciences say that are empirical since they could be observed with human senses. Our challenge here is to win the argument that there is a valid space for the metaphysical in science. African science makes this advocacy. So he's like, look, okay, there's something beyond protons and electrons. Uh, I guess I don't know. There's something beyond these atoms and electrons and protons, and if you can prove it, um, then there is room for the metaphysical in science. Is there something beyond? There is, honestly. Um, there is. There is. So, Brother Bakari is here. He says, "Peace to Black Power." Peace, brother. Glad to have you here. So there is something beyond, matter, protons and electrons. There is obviously energy. That's one thing, but there is dark matter and dark energy. Okay, and yeah, the tone and shifts because when you're being serious, there are inexplicable, unobservable phenomena in universes that don't make sense. Dark matter is one of them. Dark energy is another. Dark matter. So basically, dark matter is kind of a mathematical excuse for um, physicists, where they say they think they can estimate the matter of different things within our galaxy. Okay, that planet is 10 trillion kilograms or something. I don't know, right? And that planet is 20 trillion kilograms or something. But this star is 800 trillion, or 800 quadrillion kilograms, right? So they think they can estimate the size of the mass of different celestial phenomena. And of course, if you're looking at how things orbit around things, right? So if you see um, like for instance, how Jupiter moves around the sun, you could estimate how big the sun is and how big Jupiter is and how big Mercury is, by a ratio at least, right? Or ratio to the Earth or what have you. Now here's where it gets troubling. The universe, based off of these measurements, or sorry, the galaxy, based off of these measurements, should not hold together. Okay? So they should not hold together because there's just not enough mass to justify why they don't just fly apart. And so the scientific excuse is, well, okay, dark matter. Okay? There's something else out there that's holding these galaxies together. The same with dark energy. You have these computations, these calculations about how essentially the universe, the galaxies are also traveling away from each other. So the universe is expanding. Okay? In all directions. It's just expanding. Why is it expanding? There has to be a surplus amount of energy that is dark energy. Where's the energy coming from? Nobody knows. So you do have these things beyond protons and electrons, but the hope is that you can discover what they are, not just simply say, well, the galaxy is being held together by a god, and the galaxies are being spread apart by a deity. Because that is like it's as valid a theory as any other theory at this point. And by as valid, I mean I said it's as valid as most other theories, in the sense that none of these theories are valid so far. But it's lazy. It's lazy thinking. Instead of searching for what the dark matter is, you simply say, I have the answer. But where'd you get the answer from? You know what I mean? It's and it reminds me of this wisdom. I don't want to say it's ancient Egyptian wisdom, but there's this wisdom that says it's better to not know and to know you don't know than to randomly attribute meaning to symbols. If you see something and you don't know what it is, right? Don't just give meaning to it. Don't just give random meaning to it. Just say, I don't know. A girl winks at you on the train, but she's with her husband, right? You don't know what the fucking wink means. And it's better for you to just say, I don't particularly know what she wants from me. We're on a train. She's clearly talking to her husband. She's why is she winking at me? Right? If you don't know, you don't know. Now you can be like, I know why she's winking at me. You can walk over there, try to mac in front of her husband, get shot. Okay? You could do that. You could do that. You could get shot, but that might not be what she was like. If you don't know, you just don't know. And I know, guys, a lot of you want to say, hey man, look, you see an opportunity, you take it. I feel you on that. I feel you on that. But anyway, as they say, I feel you, man. But that's about it. Let's keep going to the reading though. So the two schools of African science hold that the non-material world provides the metaphysical basis for scientific knowledge. For the transcendentalists, it is the abode of Chiuku, the unmoved mover, the makers of the worlds, and the provider of scientific inspiration. The mechanists, on their own, though, deny the existence of such scientific deities as Chiuku, hold that Akara Muo, through its instrument Ikenga, vital force, provides scientific illumination for Akara Obi, and thus causes motion in the universe. Both discussions on Chiuku and Akara Muo are not empirically given, yet they form the foundation stones of the two accounts of the scientific edifice. African scientists also talk of Mfu, ether, a pervading force in the universe, which constitutes a functional platform for other forces in nature, namely Ikenga, Ijele, etc. Life forces in many ways can be equated to the atomic particles in Western science. They are said to be the basic constituents of material and anti-material substances. When Ijele is further broken down, Zemezu, Izumezu, and Izuzugbe are obtained. These subparticles of Ijele, respectively, can be called positive force, negative force, and neutral force. as a mezu repel one another. Positive forces repel one another, just like izu mezu, negative forces. They are called ike ma anwe, familiar forces. What izu zugbe does is to make ezimezu and izumezu gel. It does mean, therefore, that ezumezu and izumezu also repel one another without the presence of izuzugbe. The covering laws that explain these is Ibu Indice, law of discordance, and uh, Ibu Nire Anwe, law of uniformity, which states that when two entities are sufficiently different or sufficiently identical, they repel each other. Each of these subparticles of Igele are deemed to be highly charged. Two familiar particles, Ike Anwe, are therefore sufficiently identical, and two unfamiliar particles, Ike Unju Anwe, consisting of Ezu Mezu and Izumezu, are sufficiently different such that by the laws of discordance they are bound to repel. Izuzugbe is electrically uncharged and as such is able to wield two unfamiliar particles together, both but fails to do the same among familiar particles because it is a force of attraction. It's not balanced among familiar particles. So, I can't recall, but it sounds like he's kind of describing electrons and protons and neutrons, and I think he was aiming to do so because he says subatomic particles that were positive, negative, and neutral. The only thing is this: neutrons do not repel one another. Okay, that's one. So this idea that things that are similar, things that are identical, repel one another, that's not the case. Protons and electrons attract one another, right? Um, but if I recall correctly, I can't remember, but I feel like neutrons have a place within these molecules. I think they're called molecules, right? No, atoms maybe. Yeah, I think atoms. Um, or elements. Let's say elements, right? They have a place within these neutrons, um, partly because the electrons would repel each other, um, would repel each other, to the point where the molecule would fall apart. So the neutron, almost, you don't want to say gravity, but it might just be gravity. Like it might be the neutrons and the protons together, um, in mass, attract the electrons, um, to make the molecule stable, or not just the molecule, but the element stable. Um, so that's the long of it. Now I don't want to say it's gravity, um, but yeah, I don't want to say it's gravity, but it might well be on that microscopic level, um, because notwithstanding, because I don't know if you guys know, but the mass of protons and neutrons are so much greater than the mass of electrons, but the yeah, and of course the proton also tries to attract the electron, with the opposite force, but yeah, that's about it. So now we know that each Igele life force consists of Izemazu, Izumezu, and Izugzugbe. If an Igele is artificially created with more quantities of Izumezu, positive force, and less quantities of Izumezu, it is called Ike, active force. The one that has more quantities of Izumezu and less quantities of Ezumezu is called Apia, passive force, while the one in which the quantities of Ezumezu and Izumezu are identical is called Idedu, an active force. All these are subparticles which are in themselves not empirically given to the human sense. If it is possible future If in the possible future the African scientist developed a technology that enables him to detect them, it would be mistaken to describe such feat as empirical observation. The senses of machines can never come to replace the human senses. Such an effort would be a vain attempt to wish away metaphysics from the mainstream of scientific practice. Metaphysics might be a storm for scientific practice, but is hardly a storm in the sea of knowledge. Rather, it is a storm in the teacup of sensual confirmation, and as such threatens no ship of knowledge. So, what he's basically saying is that if you build an instrument, if you cannot see, I don't know, Sirius, like a star, with your naked eye, or you can't see, let's go to his example. You can't see a proton with your naked eye. Therefore, your imagination, like you're basically imagining it, in a sense. Like even if you can build a machine to see it, like don't dismiss metaphysics. Like don't dismiss the imagination as part of the scientific method. And it's like, uh, the imagination is just imagination. It's not scientific. It's just imagination. So African scientists see the metaphysics as a necessary part of scientific discourse. This position is entrenched, and as such, it cannot be wished away. They see the subparticles as metaphysical realities and know that they have crossed into mainstream metaphysics when they conduct experiments with these subparticles. Hence, metaphysics is not a bad sign for the African scientist. So that was chapter 11, and as a result of the end of the chapter, let's just add quickly, and I'll look at the comments, while we're here. So it's pretty interesting that I actually made that song. I know you're thinking, but it's only 4 minutes, and it's only 6 to 15 seconds. I wanted to do 15. I don't know why I wanted to do 15 seconds, but I wanted to do 15-second videos on YouTube, YouTube shorts, because I don't know. I just wanted to do some YouTube shorts. So that's pretty much it. Let's go back into the PDF though. So he says explanation in African science. It is Western science's own bogus claim that that all there is reality can be explained using the principle of empirical, testable, and demonstratable protocol. The implication is that anything which cannot be explained by science does not form part of the gamut of reality. This creates a divide between the real area concern of science and the ideal area concern of metaphysics, superstition, faith. Across the ages, philosophers of scientific persuasion have taken a hard stance against any form of reality not amenable to the law of science. For them, it is self-deception to suggest that there could be reality in the non-scientific. David Hume, in his inquiry concerning human understanding, raises critical questions. When we run over libraries persuaded of these principles, Hume's empirical principle, what havoc must we make? If we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school metaphysics, for instance, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. So again, this is David Hume talking about the libraries in Europe. And he's like, they have a lot of divinity and social school and metaphysics, right? They have a lot of divinity and metaphysics and theology. And he's like, that's just sophistry and illusion and so on and so forth. This is David Hume. He's not talking about Africa. But you see, they had the superstition and they got rid of it. And then they called what they got rid of, like the result, science. But we know that what we're calling science is this like is outside of theology. But this author is insisting, no. Science includes theology. So basically, whoever was arguing against David Hume is mirroring the quote unquote African science paradigm, but it's not African at all. It's just a part of the human experience that some people hold theology, give weight to theology, and you don't have to. You don't have to, and the results, as he puts it, speaks for itself. But anyway, Hume's book burning crusade stems from his contention that any term or ideas unsupported by empirical account of science are meaningless. Jules Alfred Ayer, in his book Language, Truth, and Logic, went even farther than Hume as he left the house of metaphysics in tatters. In the chapter 1 entitled The Elimination of Metaphysics, he started by saying, we may begin by criticizing the metaphysical thesis that philosophy asserts its knowledge of a reality transcending the world of science and common sense, for we shall see that many metaphysical utterances are due to the commission of logical errors, rather than to a conscious desire on the part of the authors to go beyond the limits of experience. For we shall maintain that no statement which refers to a reality transcending the limits of all possible sense experience can possibly have any literal significance, from which it must follow that the labors of those who have striven to describe such a reality have all but devoted to the production of nonsense. So what he's saying right here, obviously, is that you know all metaphysics is nonsense. And I actually I'm partial to this mindset, and I'm ashamed to say it because this is the European, um, and against the African. But sometimes we as African people have to say some Africans don't make any sense. And actually, I'm reminded of this. It's pretty interesting. When I was in this UAM, I was a young man. Obviously, I was like in my 20s, and the sister gave me a book from like some European author on some like philosophy shit. I never read it though because I was like, ew, European author philosophy shit. But I'm just reminded of that little book. She really wants me to read it, and I just never did. Um, but she gave it to me. It was pretty nice. It was nice of her, but you know, um, like I was like, I'm never gonna have time to. I don't have time to read it. Not that I never would, but I never did. I mean, you know, it's reading Europeans is hard. Because I mean, right here, these little sound bites are pretty interesting to digest, but um, like at length, they're pretty boring. So, and on their own, the logical positivists, a 20th century group whose project was to institute scientific method as the only viable way of studying reality, rejected all transcendent ideas with a hard kick. In their manifesto, The Scientific Conception of the World, the Vienna Circle, they maintain on page 150, following Wittgenstein, so Wittgenstein's pretty popular, that what can be said at all can be said clearly. Thus, it becomes increasingly clear that a position not only free from metaphysics, so this guy should have used quotation marks, not only free from metaphysics, but opposed to metaphysics was the common goal of all. Further still, they state, um, the metaphysician and the theologian believe, thereby misunderstanding themselves, that they know the state of affairs. Analysis, however, shows that these statements say nothing but merely express certain mood and spirit. In rejecting overt metaphysics and the concealed variety of a priorism, all adherent to the scientific world conception are at one. Statements of old metaphysics are meaningless because they are unverifiable and without content. For us, something is real through being incorporated into the total structure of experience. Exactly. From the foregoing, we can see that metaphysics stands no real chance against science's own decimating opposition. Thus, to borrow Lyotard's own words, science arose to become the one meta-narrative theory of reality. Explanatory accounts of reality, therefore, must be an offertory of science. Any account of knowledge of reality which is not sanctioned by rules of science is not regarded seriously, but as a bundle of metaphysical gibberish. In line with this, existing explanations in science, like Hempel's covering law model, causality model, etc., clearly do not accommodate the transcendent reality. The questions, therefore, is Western science correct in this demarcation? African scientists say no. Reality is a continuum from the physical to the transcendental. We only need stronger instruments to measure them. So this individual believes you can measure the imaginary. Again, I mean, that's like there's no reason to outright dismiss the idea that you could measure the imaginary. Part of and that's actually pretty interesting. So one thing about human beings is that our brains, some people figure that they are um, kind of like machines. You know, I mean, obviously not like the machines of today, but that the brain is very mechanistic, and so technically you could measure ideas, um, if you could replicate a brain. Like if you could mechanically replicate a brain, you could technically measure ideas. Um, and that's a whole can of worms, and I think that's partly why some people discuss artificial intelligence. They like the idea that, for instance, right now you might be thinking something deeply or something in the back of your mind, but you're doing this off of off of your brain, right? Um, I mean, there's a lot to it. Um, there's a lot to it. I don't know how else to say. I don't know how else to say that. Um, but of course, it is in and of itself imaginative. But in the realm of possibility, it's not um, impossible. You know what I mean? It's not impossible. So yeah, I mean, pretty interesting. Because some people would speculate, for instance, I think I saw some not animation, some movie or something like that, where somebody had this idea that, oh, look, you can copy somebody's brain, and then they will continue to live on in a machine or something like that. Now, granted, whoever like downloading somebody's brain will not uh, will not make them continue to live, um, because they will still be in their brain. Now, technically, a copy of them um, would continue would live, but they would not, because you can't necessarily copy matter. Um, uh, yeah, you like. I mean, all right, sorry, you can't necessarily transfer matter, if that makes any sense. But the yeah, so that notion of 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 well, we can like you can measure imagination, like yeah, maybe, but that's still not the transcendental. Like, that's still within the mechanistic schools. What I'm saying in the long form. I like discussing these science papers. They make me seem sophisticated, don't they? uh, Let me see what the yeah. So I'm just checking the chat, and it's like, yeah. Um, we only need a stronger instrument to measure them. So Gio Ozumba's Integrative Humanism project offers a theoretic basis for the model of explanation, which takes into account the physical and transcendental realities. Hence, we in this work attempt to create what we shall dub integrative humanism model of explanation in science. By so doing, I reject the anti-metaphysical stance of Hume, Ayer, and the logical positivists, and maintain that the so-called metaphysical is possible and real in its own class. So the background to the Gio Ozumba's integrative humanism project. There are 8 canons, observation principles of integrative humanism, which a researcher might have in his fingerprint as he employs it as a tool of research. They include context dependence of value. A researcher must recognize that value for the integrative is not straight-jacketed, but depends on context or ontological landscape. What is true or what works in one context might be false or might not work in another. Multiplicity and interdependence of reality. A researcher must recognize that reality for the integrativist is multi-layered, and they form a network of interdependence through which a comprehensive understanding of reality is obtained. Continuity of being. A researcher must also recognize that being for the integrativist is not spatio-temporal bound, i.e., it does not have terrestrial limitations. It continues from the physical to the transcendental realm. Man, for example, is seen as a being up onto eternity. Epistemic relevance of theory. A researcher must recognize that in harmonizing or integrating various theories for a given result-oriented research, not all available theories must be integrated. As a result of this principle, only theories that are considered best suited or relevant to the theme or demands of the research are integrated. Others which are not relevant to the subject would not be thrown away, but set aside for a fitting subject matter. Comprehensive approach. A researcher must understand that integrativists take a comprehensive approach in studying reality. Sensitive openness is exercised in admitting theories and structures as well as in dimensions of existence such as spiritual, physical divide. Integrativists stand against regimentation, fragmentation, compartmentalization, and discrimination in the process of inquiry. Non-abandonment of structure for the integrativists. I don't know. We're just going to get through this stuff. Theories are structures. It is not encouraged that structures be demolished simply because an area has been identified where it does not fit in. Grativists set aside hypotheses. And I know I'm saying it like differently every time because partly I'm just like, I don't even know what he's talking about. Set aside hypotheses, which are, and that's the thing I want you guys to know. Sometimes when you're reading and you get into this place where you don't know what they're talking about and you don't actually care. You know what I mean? You don't actually care. Like, just try to read through it. You know, and maybe something might jump out to you. But sometimes, because sometimes I might say, look, if I actually care, I might try to reread it a couple of times to figure out what he's talking about. But part of me is also realizing overall he's not talking about anything. You know, um, kind of like what he was saying, Hume and them were saying, which was dismiss metaphysics entirely. So for that, I'm kind of just mumbling through, just so that we could, like I think I have to. I'm thinking about how I have to buy a certain cable, um, to make my computer function better. So it's just, yeah. So integrativists set aside hypotheses which are ineffective to a given subject of research. Every research is contextualized in every context, deemed unique. Structures which fail in one context could thrive in another. Theoretic suspension. In the course of a research, the goal of an integrativist is always to assemble all possible and relevant theories so as to, as much as possible, reach the standard of comprehensiveness. In doing this, sometimes it is possible to stumble on theories which do not fully represent all they claim or which have generated some doubt over their relevance. Integrativists not advocate the suspension or setting aside of such theories, not their outright rejection. Even theories that are found to be irrelevant or given context of research are not abandoned but suspended. So part of what I'm thinking of on the side is, the idea of like replicating a human. Um, like there's so many flaws to it. Um, but like if you want to replicate the human mind, I think you would also have to replicate the human body and the human experience. But even in so doing, it is lackluster. You know, a part of a human self awareness is his um, is the inevitability of his death. You know, so for instance, um, why does a man marry? He marries because he's going to die. You know, and so he accumulates things, and because he's going to die, he's going to have to give these things away. And to whom? You know, so a robot or a machine which will not die, doesn't have to give things away. And so a lot of um, human thoughts, like for instance, laws in marriage, laws in divorce, laws of family, laws of heirship, a lot of that is no longer something to develop if you're not going to die. You know what I mean? It's like actually I could think about in the fantasy setting, I think there are vampires. I'm not 100% sure, but I think some people say vampires are immortals, or maybe Dracula's immortal. I don't know. But the idea is that a vampire would not have to marry they if they don't have to leave anything to any descendants. You know, and of course they don't even have to have children, or even have to know of their children because they don't need to leave their children anything. Their children will never care for them in their old age because all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot to it. It reminds me of a story. I can't remember. There was some story, some movie I was watching, and like toward the end, like I think it was like some guy was Jesus or something. What was I watching? That's so fucking random. I think I want to go watch that shit again. That's so funny. All right, so anyway, a researcher must recognize that the spiritual or the transcendental occupies a significant place in the project of integrative humanism. Reality, being, man, life, purpose, etc., lingers into the transcendental. They are not earthbound. Every research and every earthly endeavor has a purpose, but all endeavors have one ultimate goal, purpose, which is not physical, but spiritual or transcendental. Thus, in studying reality, being, man, nature, etc., the transcendental dimension must be taken into consideration if a researcher hopes to obtain a balanced or comprehensive result. In fact, I remember what was the story. So I don't know what I was reading, but it was some random story where I guess some guy was like an immortal. No, I don't know if he was immortal or not, but he never aged. And so the way how he would navigate, now of course this is fiction, but the way how he would navigate is different from how you or I would navigate. And another thing about it was that he might have been pushed out of human societies because he never aged, and there was something that seemed like possession. And so the idea was that this man was really Jesus, or somehow, in the sense that in his at some point this gentleman um, met Buddha. Like he went to talk to the Buddha, and then he started repeating what the Buddha was saying around the Israel area, right? And then, oh, I guess he wasn't born because I guess they killed him and he walked out of it. Um, but um, but the thing is that as he was repeating the teachings, eventually 2,000 years later, people were like, "Yo, there was this guy who was magic, and he had this kind of wisdom." And basically his wisdom was like mirroring Buddha. But the thing about it is that this guy, because he can't age, he can't stay in an area for too long because people are going to be suspicious. Why is it that I'm 80 years old and you're 20 years old or something, right? Or you're 30 years old. But then also he doesn't form families or relationships too seriously because they're all going to die. And so I say this to say that if a machine does not have the ability to age and pass and die, then it's just not going to adopt in the same human um, behaviorisms that you or I would demonstrate, because we are going to age and die. You know, um, and so a lot of and so like in order to truly make a human experience, like a human, or remake a human, you'd have to make something that dies, something that's biological, something that and basically the easy way is to just have a kid. You know what I mean? Or just to make a clone, actually. Um, but like to call it a machine, I mean, yeah, but like I mean, obviously you could do a machine that replicates the human experience to a T, but then it becomes, well, what good is a freaking human? Now it could be a super intelligent human, but even that sort of super intelligent human, um, is a little bit like it will shift the human experience once again. You know, um, it will shift the experience, and not to say that there are no humans that are super intelligent, because obviously there are, but obviously not to the level of you know compute the processing speed, because a large part of what we do and how we engage each other relates to our identity, our self awareness and our self identity. And so a lot of people who might be listening to me, for instance, are in like have an identity that's compatible with it. In fact, even just using this European as an example. So on my Discord, some European came in and he asked some stupid question about, hey, you guys think Pan-Arabism or Pan-Africanism is compatible with Pan-Africanism? And it's like, why are you asking, right? I didn't know if he was European or not. Um, so I had to ask, because I'm like, if you're black, why do you care about Pan-Arabism? And if you're Arab, why do you care about Pan-Africanism? They're like, no, I'm European, and it's for the socialism, so on and so forth. And it's like a large extent of like a large part of your behavior really shaped by your sense of identity. So, um, like to make a human is a really interesting thing, and it's probably possible, but why you would make a human is the big question. Like what's the point of making a human, if not like why don't you make something superior to humans? Um, I mean, but of course, if you flex, you flex, right? So also integrative hedonism has some basic themes, which include one, reality, it is multi-layered. Two, being, it has physical and transcendental sides. Three, life, there is a life in the hereafter. So again, this is not provable. Four, he is at the center of humanistic studies and is the man. He is at the center of humanistic studies and is a being unto eternity. Delineation, every resource is delineated into a context. Holism and integration, different realities come to form a holism. Interdependence, things are all in a network. Purpose, every research has a purpose, and all researches have a grand purpose, which is the transcendental. The spiritual and the transcendental forms a necessary part of the web of reality. And positive outlook. Integrativists maintain this mindset in studying reality. Therefore, a basic understanding of integrative humanism must be rooted in the appreciation of these canons and themes. We may now construct a model of explanation in science using integrative humanism. So, again, you know, like this is forcing the question, and that's the thing. It's like, what's the point of forcing the question? Now, there's 2 points actually. I should say, because I will admit I'm also in the process of creating ideology, in a sense, and a part of the justification for an ideology is saying, look, there's a historical precedence. So, to this person's credit, there is a historical precedence in believing in a life here of the hereafter. There's a historical precedence in believing in the spiritual. Um, but this historical precedence, we have to come to terms with that. It's at this point in time, it's imaginary. You know, it's unconfirmed and imaginary, and I think that's something that we don't walk away with enough. But we're going to continue reading. Modes of scientific explanation and their shortcomings. It is important to first discuss the affinity between prediction and explanation in science. Using the logical tools of induction and deduction, if one predicts the occurrence of an event, he has offered an explanation why such a thing is going to happen. If, on the other hand, he offers an explanation why an event should occur, which has not occurred, he has offered a prediction of some sort. This is the reason why writers often choose to discuss the two hand in hand. But their shared affinity does not altogether obliterate the thin membrane of their difference. To this we may state that while the basic concern of prediction is to extrapolate what is to happen given a certain prevalent contingent condition, that of explanation is to discuss using the principle of empirical, testable, demonstrable protocols why what happened is tenable. Thus Hempel in his work Aspects of Scientific Explanation states that scientific explanations are often offered in response to what he calls explanations seeking why questions. He also maintains that science explanations possess a logical structure, typically of a deductive argument. This means that scientific explanations could be constructed in a set of propositions consisting of premises and a conclusion. The conclusion states that the phenomenon that needs explaining actually occurs, and that the premise tells us why the conclusion is true. Let us take for our example the question, why do bodies fall downwards? This is a typical explanation seeking why question. To supply an answer to it, Hempel insists we must construct an argument whose conclusion is bodies fall downwards, and whose premise tells us why this conclusion is true. Following a cautious observation, the task of providing an account of scientific explanation that becomes the task of characterizing precisely the relation that must hold between a set of premises and a conclusion, in order for the former to count as an explanation of the latter. That was the problem Hempel set himself. The source of this problem is that Hempel's covering law model is generated from a deductive type of logical argument which deals with the relation of necessity. The shortfall therefrom is that scientific propositions need experimental verification to ascertain their truth, therefore do not depend on some logical form but on some appeal to the contingent world. For this gap, Hempel's covering law model becomes insufficient for scientific explanation. So again, it's just a little bit confusing. In logical structure, Hempel maintains the following: that the premises should entail the conclusions, i.e., the argument should be a deductive one. Okay, that the premises should be true. So the premises should entail the conclusion. Premises should be true. Now the premises should consist of at least one general law. Hence, it is called a covering law model. General laws are things such as water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Schematically, Hempel's covering law model of explanation can be written as follows: general laws, particular facts, phenomena to explain. Although Hempel intended it that all general laws must have been inductively generated, i.e., with appeal to the contingent world, this is not sufficient since we know that scientific laws are no longer flawless. Take, for example, the gravitational law, which states that whatever goes up must come down. It would be invalid and which offers an inaccurate scientific explanation to say all bodies that go up must come down. Spaceship Curiosity has gone up to Mars. Spaceship Curiosity must come down. So he's like, look, anything that goes up must come down. So because the spaceship went to Mars, it must return. And it's like, no, that's not the case that it must return. This is because we know that this is not going to happen. Also, like, like something could explode or something could just stay inside of outer space. It doesn't have to come back down. This is because we know that this is not going to happen. Also, Hempel's model suffers from the point of view of symmetry, i.e., if phenomenon A explains phenomenon B, the reverse would not hold. And from the point of view of irrelevance, one of the premises might just be technically irrelevant to the explanation, even though it is structurally relevant. Example: all who have low sperm count cannot impregnate women. Irene has low sperm count. Irene cannot impregnate women. Now, I don't know what he's talking about. Um, why would Irene have low sperm count? But anyway, maybe she has no sperm count. I guess no is low, but I don't know. The above argument reveals the premise too is technically irrelevant to the conclusion because the reason why Irene cannot impregnate women is that she is not a man, not as the premise claims. She has low, not as the premise claims, she has low sperm count. It is partly for the type of science, but no, but see, I don't know. Right? It is partly for this type of scenario that F. Chalmers suggests that induction must be a necessary part of the scientific explanation, where general laws are effectively subjected to observational tests. On its own part, the causality model of scientific explanation, though escapes the problem of symmetry and irrelevance, still has its own loopholes. Philosophers like David Hume have dealt a heavy blow. Let's check my thing. Have dealt a heavy blow on it by insisting, and rightly so, that there is no observable causal connection between a cause and an effect. Thus, for this attested shortcoming of both the covering law model and the causality model, as well as the apparent silence on reality is not amenable to the so-called empirical, testable, demonstrable protocol, we undertake to develop a more comprehensive model of scientific explanation capable of fixing the problems here identified. So that's actually pretty interesting to come with a more comprehensive model. Now, granted, I don't think this model was that great, but it's still good to come up with your own model. But let's see what it is. The IHM, the Integrative Humanism Model of Explanation in African Science. So some philosophers of science have raised the question, can science explain everything? Or are there some phenomenon that must be forever elude science? This is Akasha says that. To answer these questions, we must first find out the conception of science complied. Do we mean by science a body of autonomous or compartmentalized knowledge or liberalized system, or do we mean Western or African science? It is to the first that the law of empirical, testable, demonstrable protocol applies, while it does not essentially hold in the latter. But it is difficult to prove that science is the first conception can explain everything, and as well difficult to prove that in the second conception, though probably able to explain everything, that such a body of knowledge could be called science in the modern sense. The difficulty is unraveled at any sincere attempt to define science from the point of view of history. Stephen Mason observes, if we wish to define what science has been and what it has accomplished historically, we find it difficult to formulate a definition which holds for all times and places. The variation of difference from one epoch to another could with certainty be placed not just in the matter of degree, but substance. This safely implies difference in both method and criteria. So I want to say this too. So because something had a different definition in the past, doesn't hold true in all times and places. So what? What does it mean today? That's how you're supposed to, like, you are here. What does it mean today? What does if World War One didn't mean anything, like the phraseology, World War One didn't mean anything, in 1912, because you might have said that in 1912, people were like, wait, well, I think the war started in 1914, but still, you get what I'm saying. But you might say it's 1914 or 15 or 18 or whatever, 1920. World War One, people are like, what do you mean? There's going to be a second one, right? But even so, the point is, like, who cares if it didn't mean anything at that point in time? Like, who cares if it was the Great War at that point in time? What does it mean today? That's the issue that a lot of us have, where it's like, oh, this, things are changing, and shut up. What it meant to be a man, and like, I don't care. What does it mean today? Yeah, what does it mean today? And I don't mean that in the sense of, you guys get what I'm saying. So the variation of difference from one epoch to another could with serious be placed not just in the matter of degree, but substance. This safely implies difference in both method and criteria. In this chapter, I am passionate against the autonomous conception of science and for a liberal system. The world for the integrativist is a generic term which applies not only to the realm bound within space and time, but to the realm of the transcendent or the continuing. The transcendent world, therefore, is conceived as the continuing part of the physical world. Reality and the world are divided into the physical and the non-physical or metaphysical. Together they form the massive web of reality, MWR, where every element, empirical or metaphysical, serves not as a missing link of reality as the Sun Tzu holds, but a necessary link of reality. This is why one of the observations canons of integrative humanism states that reality is multiple and interdependent. For this, integrativists do not say, like the complementarists, that a thing serves a missing link of reality, but that it serves a necessary link of reality. The difference between the two is essentially qualitative rather than quantitative. While the former is negative, the latter is positive. This mindset is objectified in the integrativist theme of positive outlook to reality and is a very important tool in the toolkit of integrative humanism project. This, among many, forms a delicate theoretic framework where integrativists part ways with the complementarists. We can now diagram the massive web of reality as the integrativists conceive it: strand of reality, context, universe, or world, where every strand represents a reality, physical or non-physical, every joint represents a context, and every space represents a universe, either physical or metaphysical. Integrativists say that this web is massive because it is all-encompassing, connecting all of reality, whether physical or metaphysical, tangible or non-tangible, mundane or spiritual, worldly or heavenly, etc. The integrativists are therefore agreed that science, in a liberal sense, or African science, to be specific, can explain as much as the reality as has taken up for its concern. To show how this could be done, this integrativist human model of scientific explanation is here developed upon the principle the present author has chosen to dub a conjecture, and it is follows: a general theory of value for a contingent world is consequent of a particular theory of value for a necessary world, inductive inference. A general theory of value for a principal world is a consequent of a general theory of value for a contingent world, reductive inference. A particular theory of value for a necessary world is consequent of a general theory of value for a possible world, deductive reference. We define induction as a logical inference from particular to general, reduction as a logical inference from a lower class general case to a higher class general case, where the relation lower class, higher class applies to inference from contingent world to the possible world, and deduction as a logical inference from general to particular case. Integrative humanism model of explanation, hereafter referred to IHM, stipulates that every reality, physical or not metaphysical, is connected in one form or another to the whole in the massive web of reality. Since African science deals with reality, it follows that every phenomenon can be explained using IHM. The structure of logical argument in IHM encapsulates the inductive, reductive, and deductive properties. It shows that, like Hempel's covering law model, IHM also has the logical structure of an argument. But unlike Hempel's, which is essentially deductive, IHM is first inductive, reductive, then deductive. What this means is that premise one, which is necessarily a general law, is obtained through inductive inferences. Premise two, through what we have called reductive inferences, and the conclusion obtained through deductive inference. It must be difficult to an onlooking logician to see how arguments could take on all three structures in one syllogism. This is possible because the argument syllogism of IHM is a power argument. A power argument in African logic is one that contains more than one argument when broken down. Also, it is a modal argument dealing with the necessary, possible, and contingent worlds, unlike Hempel's deductive type, which deals only on necessary worlds. Okay, so this guy needs to give an example. Let me see what the chat is like. If there's as much confusion. Yeah, so I see how this is not the best read on the planet. But yeah, so essentially, I guess you could just boil it down. He's like, look, we have this model that is going to prove something, or assert something exists based off of three different criterion, and it just seems like a jumble. And it seems like he invented it, less so than this is a historical observation. But anyway, we'll see. So there are three main criteria which an argument of IHM must meet in order to serve as a verifiable model of scientific explanation capable of explaining whatever phenomenon science has taken up. They are: the first premise, which the general law must be inductively obtained. The second premise, which needs not be a general law, must be obtained through reductive inference. Together, the two premises, which must be true insofar as they meet the criteria, would entail the conclusion, i.e. the conclusion would be deduced from them. The terms of argument must obey the rules of cause and effect. The premise must be relevant to the conclusion. So that's pretty interesting, pretty loaded. I'm just waiting for him to give an example so we could demonstrate that. But basically, the first premise is abductively obtained. The second is a reductive. and the third is the conclusion, and the third is deductive, based off of the first two premises, which is pretty interesting. But we'll see what it looks like in in context. So, however, the tricky business about the argument of IHM is that it must be constructed or generated from the constituents of two other arguments. Let us take an example and demonstrate how this works. Someone asks you to explain why there is life in your garden. To explain how this is true using the IHM, one first constructs a deductive argument. There is water in my garden, so there is life in it. Wherever there is water, there is also life. And a reductive argument. So he's like, look, this is the first argument. Wherever there's water, there's life. Okay? There's water in my garden, there's also life in it. So a reductive argument is there's water in this contingent world, so there's life in it. Right? Wherever there's water in all possible worlds, there also is life. Okay? So he's like, two, wherever there's water, there's life. And then wherever there's water, there's also life. So I feel like these are the same thing, honestly. So note that phrases all possible in the above argument use more as an extensional sense rather than exclusivity in a modal sense. So I feel like they're the same, honestly. But this is kind of relating, oh, my garden has water. I don't know. But to construct or generate the final argument of IHM, one adopts the conclusion of the inductive argument as the first premise, a particular substitution instance of the premise of the reductive argument as the second premise, and from the two deduce the conclusion of the argument of the IHM. So let us do this. IHM model argument, wherever there is water, there is also life. There is water in my garden, there is life in my garden. Right? Therefore, there's life in my garden. So somebody asks you, why is there life in your garden? Well, wherever there's water, there's life. There's water in my garden. Therefore, so I don't see the reductive. Maybe you guys see it. I don't see it, but we're gonna keep going. From the foregoing, one can see that even when tasted more broadly, the IHM explanation does not suffer most of the shortcomings of the conventional model. Therefore, the basic agitations against the IHM scientific explanation model is: can science, liberal or African, explain the origin of life? Can it explain the eternal purpose of all things? Can it explain cause and effect? Can it explain thought? Can it explain the personality of God, etc.? We say yes, African science can explain all these by following two rules. So again, this is actually pretty interesting. The origin of life, eternal purpose of all things, cause and effect, thought, personality of a deity. And then you could actually explain them with, like, come on. Anyway, so and I mean, everybody has their own answers to these things, and that's why you can't necessarily entirely dismiss religion, because religion offers some sort of insight into these questions. Not insight, I don't want to say insight, but it offers a answer to these questions. So, I'm not really too versed in the Christian faith, but I guess the faith I'm most familiar with would be the Christian faith. And so when you say, does this religion explain the origin of life? Right? Now, obviously it doesn't, but they offer an explanation, which is the story of the Garden of Eden. Right? They take it from the Old Testament, or from their Old Testament, the story of the Garden of Eden, where essentially a deity just created everything. Okay, so what's the eternal purpose of all things? So of all things, so in this same Genesis, the same first book of this religious discussion, all things are subjected to man, right? And man is the ruler of all things. Can it explain cause and effect? Now, I don't think it really talks into cause and effect, so I'm just going to jump ahead of that. Can it explain thought? I don't know. Like, again, I don't know if it explains. Oh, yeah, I think thought may be the result of Adam eating this apple. Adam eats this apple, and therefore he's able to think, and he gets knowledge in that sense, as opposed to other animals, which I guess did not eat this apple. Can I explain the personality of a deity? Yes, this deity of theirs is very vengeful and vindictive and so on and so forth. So, like, religions offer, I guess, 4 out of 5. I'm not sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. 4 out of 5 of the answers. Now, is any of it correct? No. There's no Garden of Eden. There's no apple that grants knowledge. There's no deity to have a personality, and not everything is subject to man. Um, but uh, but it's an interesting paradigm to provide for people, because each of that has its own purpose. In a sense, you know, you tell people that they were the last creation and the best creation, and um, and you tell them that everything is subject to them, and then they have a personality that where they do not defer to anything, right? You tell people that they can think because they disobeyed their deity. Um, uh, like, you kind of criminalize and demonize thought, but at the same time, yeah, which is actually kind of stupid. But if you're trying to control the people, it's pretty good. You tell them that their deity is vindictive and vengeful and is always watching them, is omniscient, omnipresent, but also, like, I'm gonna punish you if you disobey me, type shit. Um, yeah, you can effectively control the people. So religion has a good purpose in controlling people, but also it also offers some sort of ideas to people too. But I mean, it's obviously so transparently manipulative that I, like, even when I'm trying to praise it, I can't. But it is what it is. How you guys doing this? All right. So never know. I'm watching this streamer. He plays this video game and he's hilarious. He says sometimes he doesn't know how people watch him, but way more people watch him than. But it is what it is. But obviously they're a bunch of teenagers. I got sophisticated, um, sophisticated, genius squad. So it's all good. So anyway, never to lose sight of the distinction between concept and object. Always remember to apply as and when due the principle of demonstrable faith protocol. So the first rule maintains that conception realities are not finite and measurable as objective realities, and any attempt to subject them to empirical, testable, demonstrable, um, I want to say demonstrable, honestly. Demonstrable protocol would fail. Conceptual realities are neither objective nor transcendent realities, nor even their opposites, but abstract concepts we employ to describe the capacity of absence. For example, good is the absence of bad, and vice versa. Death is the absence of life, but life is a finite entity. Cold is the absence of heat, but heat is an entity. Darkness is the absence of light, but light is an entity we can measure, etc. When we view these concepts as physical or transcendental entities, we run into problems trying to measure them. We may also note the difference between conceptual realities and transcendental realities in that the latter exist as substantive things, only that they are not empirical, but the former does not exist at all, save for their standing concepts, names which are abstract. We cannot take a handful of good or cold. We cannot even describe the activities without our description matching a perfect explanation of the absence of something. But we can talk of God's activities. We can describe the invisible subatomic particles. We can describe. Damn it! I got distracted. Ugh. Somebody. Let me just see. Um, we cannot take a handful of good or cold. We cannot even describe their activities without or describe description matching a perfect explanation of the absence of something. But we can talk of God's activities. We can describe the invisible subatomic particles. We can describe magnetism, and we can describe the activities of gravitational force. We can also talk of other life and meaningfully describe the eternal purpose of all things. So the transcendent realities exist, though not in the same empirical state as the physical ones. For this, the second rule proffers the principle of demonstrable faith protocol. The principle states that the link between the physical and the transcendent realities. So why am I pronouncing this wrong? I think because I just think it's going to be a different word, and I just say what first comes. Like, as soon as you start demonstrable, and then you're like, oh wait. Um, and the transcendent realities in faith, which can be demonstrated. The scientist first believes the subatomic particles are real before he sets out to conjure and put them to use. He first believes that the gravitational force is real before he can set out to demonstrate it. The same is true of electromagnetism, trigonometry, infrared. Despite how hard science has tried to invent sophisticated technologies as particle detectors and all sorts of measuring techniques, we know that there are metaphysical realities. How we come to know the primarily is through faith, which is demonstrable. Um, the discovery of the laws governing these metaphysical realities were done after regular observation and demonstration of their impact in the physical world. One reaches a conclusion by faith that they are, even without perceiving them. When I look around the world and see the design of nature, I conclude that there is a being God who designed the world, just like Michelangelo designed the cathedral in Rome. And this is not even Michelangelo, this is Michel Angelo. But anyway, it's in Rome. Even without perceiving this God, as I do not perceive Michelangelo. I know he exists according to the rule of demonstrable faith protocol. In the same way we can explain cause and effect. I have 4 vases on my table. I pick up the first one and toss it up. It lands on the ground with sufficient force and shatters. I did the same to the second vase. When I tossed up the third vase, my friend Emeka caught it in mid-air mildly, thereby preventing it from landing on hard ground with sufficient force. That one did not break. I tossed up the fourth one, and again it lands on the hard ground with sufficient force and breaks. According to empirical, testable, demonstrable protocol, there is no causal connection between my tossing the vases up and their breaking. Yes, but according to demonstrable faith protocol, there is. The second, third, and fourth throw prove it. Thus, according to Integrative Humanism Project, every phenomenon which science has taken up for its concern can be explained using the IHM explanation model. The consumption of science beyond the knowledge compartments and autonomous circles in the IHM scientific explanation model therefore form our recommendations for a more liberal study of nature. So, I don't know. This was kind of weird. So what is this? So like this. Like, here's the typo. Michelangelo. Did Michelangelo design a cathedral in Rome? No. In fact, I don't even think Michelangelo. I don't even know if Michelangelo designed the cathedral. I think he painted, but I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure. But my point is this: Michelangelo did not design a cathedral in Rome. That said, there you go. You know, you can't just simply say, "Hey, you know, this happened, and therefore, you know, I know this God exists because of rule of demonstration." No, that's not a proof. Like what designed the world? I know that some deity designed the world. When, where, how? You know, because the reality is this. You know, the world begins as this big ball of magma. It does not. And then a lot of life, as we know it, is very, very happenstance. You know, it's very, very happenstance and very non-deliberate. You know, and I think we don't take that into account. Like they say, for instance, that the human species was nearly extinct. Was like humans used to be an endangered species. You know, believe it or not. And so there are no other universes, no other galaxies, no, not galaxies, but no other, you know, parallel universes in a sense, right? But in a parallel universe, humans don't exist at all. Anyway, so I was just checking the comments. There's no comments today, which is pretty interesting, but I don't blame it. It's really not my favorite article. Like, you know, but the good thing is this, that because the year is ending, I don't think I'll read another book for the rest of the year. Yeah. Anyway, so Ijioma's model of harmony of contraries. In his audacious theory of harmonious monism, Ijeoma sets forth a pattern of thought which is very much African. This theory holds 2 postulations, one from African metaphysics and the other from African logic. His position is that African metaphysics conceives realities in 2 dimensions, namely the physical and the non-physical. These 2 aspects of reality do not, however, exist in isolation or without the other, hence their confluence is basic in understanding reality from African perspectives. The meeting point of the 2 aspects of reality represents, according to Ijeoma, a position of stability or completeness of being. In this way, it is correct to say that every being in African ontology has both aspects, namely the physical and the non-physical. A being is therefore said to be stable if the equilibrium of matter and spirit is formed. When there is disequilibrium, a being is said to be unstable. This thought can also be extended to inanimate objects. For Africans, according to Ijeoma, everything perceptible is made up of matter and spirit. They can also be said to be stable or unstable. If a stone, for example, is hit um, with a hammer, and it breaks, it means a disequilibrium has been caused to its constitution. If, on the other hand, it does not break, it means that the force of the hammer is unable to cause disequilibrium. The spirit aspect is thought to be an active force in the physical aspect. Thus, until enough pressure is exerted on an object, whether obliviously animate or seemingly inanimate, to exit the spirit aspect, disequilibrium may not be caused. The second postulation is from the point of view of logic. African logic, following the framework of African metaphysics, is three valued in character, i.e., the contrary values of truth and falsehood as well as their harmony. The value of proposition that is said to be true or false is partial. A complete evaluation must have the two partial values of truthhood and falsehood harmonized. It is at such a point that each reality is fully understood and realized. As a model of explanation in African science, Ijeoman's harmony of contraries posits that none can, as scientists, explain the realities of African universe without a tool that adequately interprets it. Unlike in Western science, African science deals with both the physical and the metaphysical realities, both of which also unite in objects of scientific research and experimentation. In African science, the objects of research and matter are matter and antimatter as well as non-matter. The understanding of the individual constitution of each and their interplay requires logic, which has massive diagonal expressive powers such as contained in the theory of harmonious monism. In diagrammatic form, the interplay between the three values in the theory of harmonious monism can be represented as follows: background theory, material contrary, spiritual contrary, harmonized monism. It's like a car, right? So the IHMC diagram above tries to explain that in African science, every interpretation of reality has a background theory, which among other things describes all aspects of the reality. The description of the metaphysical aspect is called the substructure framework, while that of the physical is called the superstructure framework. The realities that to be interpreted or explained are also grouped into spiritual contrary, metaphysical, and material contrary, physical. In separate units, we notice that the two contraries are fragmented, hence with smaller circles. However, in their union, they form a bigger circle signifying completeness or fullness. It is said, for example, that subatomic particles are not amenable to human senses. This simply means they are not physical realities. Although Western science claims to detect them by some mechanical process, but detection is not the same as perception. Granted that so detecting something is not the same as perceiving something. Granted that the subatomic particles are not one of physical realities but the metaphysical, African science also grants that their metaphysical state, sub-natural world, every particle is isolated from the other. The transcendental school of African science holds that Chiuku, a certain scientific force or deity, causes them to lump up with the pressure of his breath. It is that breath for them, becomes the spiritual aspect of the object. On another hand, members of the mechanistic school rejects this and posits that what causes the lumping of subatomic particles into perceptible mixtures of matter and antimatter is ethereal pressure, which breaks the discordant force, pushing them apart, and activates the forces of attraction by itself, by default. So actually, pretty interesting. He says the word ether here. So up until even the like 1940s, right? The science community, the Western science community, believed in the ether, um, but it's no longer a thing. So the force of attraction equated to ijele, which is metaphysical, becomes the spiritual aspect of any object formed from such mixture. The point from the above is that, and so when I say the ether, so that's another thing. It's like, yeah, Western science does have its flaws. It's not perfect, and it does have its own, like it has its own flawed origins. Um, anyway, let's see what we think. So, so that's that. So on the other hand, rejects this lumping, so on and so forth, ethereal pressure, which breaks the discordant force, pushing them apart and activates the force of attraction by default. The force of attraction equated to ijele, life force, which is metaphysical, becomes the spiritual aspect of any object formed from such mixture. The point from the above is that whether it is the breath of Chiuko, as the transcendentalists have it, or the force of attraction, as the mechanists would insist, every object of science is imbued with a spiritual aspect. This orientation might not be absolved from a philosophical outcast called animism, but this is a strong point African science may wish to emphasize. All things are full of guides, and the magnets has a soul that moves iron. It is credited to Thales of Miletus, while Anaximenes is said to have declared This is our soul being air holds us together, so do breath and air encompass the whole world. This is the orientation of African science regarding observable realities. Therefore, it can be reconciled that every object in its fullness is composed of the physical and the metaphysical aspects, and Ijioma's model of harmony of contraries offers a tool for interpreting shades of reality, whether in a fragmentary or complete form. This is because the coming together of matter and antimatter signifies their individualization in much the same way as the coming together of two contraries leads to a harmonious whole. In one word, Ijioma's model of harmony or contraries provides a framework for explaining different shades of reality into African science, whether physical, spiritual, or the harmony of the two. Asuzu's Ibioande model, IAM, the aim has a metaphysical foundation. Asuazu holds that African ontology recognizes two shades of reality, namely the physical and the metaphysical. So these two is incomplete without the other. Hence they each serve as a missing link of reality. The whole gamut of reality consists of the physical and the metaphysical exist in a chain of networks, thus the absence of any creates a vacuum in the linkage. This makes that being a missing link in the chain. It is therefore Asuazu's position that the place of every being in the chain of reality cannot be overemphasized. This makes every being or shade of reality incomplete without the other. The physical, therefore, must complement the metaphysical and vice versa for each to realize itself fully. Thus, in its fullness, reality exists as both matter and spirit. What Asuazu's Ibiandina model therefore stipulates is that scientific explanation must go beyond the objects of sensual perception and offer rational interpretations on the nature and activities of those objects which are beyond the senses. This is because the physical only represents the aspect of reality which remains incomplete if not complemented by the metaphysical. AIM as a model of scientific explanation makes illustration with Danda, a certain gregarious species of ant renowned in Igbo folklore for this simplistic demonstration of group power. Collectively, these ants surmount heavy loads of burdens which would be impossible for a single individual among them. In this same way, Asanzu's theory implies that organizing, interpreting, and giving full scientific account of the universe would go beyond the capacity of empirical tools or measurement standards alone without the support of a complementation with non-empirical frameworks. AIM as a tool or explanation in African science provides the balanced framework for organizing, interpreting, and explaining all shades of reality, whether physical or metaphysical, or the complement of the two. The functionality of AIM can be diagrammed as follows. So there's the background theory, substructure, deep link, superstructure. So again, this is a little bit on the confusing side, and that's a sad thing because he's a PhD, but because this is actually more of a philosophy book, honestly. But it just kind of reminds me of this idea of try not to do grand gestures, or to speculate, oh well, we can't do anything grand because we don't have the tools, and only if we forget that. Try to be useful today. This isn't useful. This just isn't useful. But anyway, let's keep going. So what the AIM diagram explains is that in African science, every interpretation of reality has a background theory, which among other things describes all aspects of the reality. The description of the metaphysical aspect is called the substructure framework, while that of the physical is called the superstructure framework. The reality to be interpreted or explained are also grouped into deep links, metaphysical, and surface links. Physical is therefore can be observed that however realities are broken up or grouped, AIM would most likely offer comprehensive explanations to them. The model of causal explanation. So this model extrapolates on the productive interplay of realities. The metaphysical is held to provide a substructural framework for the empirical, which is the superstructural framework. Whereas the former is the foundation of all causes, the latter is where these effects manifest. For Uduag women and Akpan in African science, everything is caused and can be explained either by natural inference or supernatural reference, depending on the magnitude of the event. It could be a form of uniformity, occurrence, or agency push, which Kwame Gyake, the Ghanaian philosopher, describes as agitative causation. However, dimension or direction, MCE, offers a tool for explaining the interplay of realities. Okay, the interplay of realities, which most times takes place at a distance or without contact. Richard Bentley, as cited in Idiog Women and Akpan, tends to suggest that why causality is problematic in Western science is because of the seeming absurdity. Here in Africa, the opposite is the case. Africans do not understand why causality should be problematic, where it is obvious that since the two aspects of reality, physical and metaphysical, do not have the same structure, it is only natural that they must meet somehow. In fact, one might even claim that Africans almost perceive when one thing causes another because the inference from the metaphysical to the physical is most times necessary rather than para-contingent. What MCE posits is that everything is caused by something, the metaphysical necessarily causes the physical, and the physical is always caused by the metaphysical. The relationship between the two worlds and among all forms of reality can also be explained in these terms. The dictum in African scientific practice, which says, when in doubt, look for the cause, because all things relate by cause and effect in their points of convergence and divergence. So, again, this is interesting to say that everything that's physical is caused by the metaphysical. Um, it's just a statement, you know. And it's like if you can't prove it, like it's just a statement, and that's the thing that we don't get, but it is what it is. So we'll continue. I'm just trying to figure out how much more of this reading is there because it's pretty long. So postscript: the challenge of African science. So all right, let us assume that in these sketchy paragraphs we have systematized a section of African experience, and it could now be called science, at least by our modest African standards. But what then would be the challenge of this new discipline? Are schools and universities likely to introduce courses in it? Is there a need for a unique African science? What difference would it make? Would the laboratories of this science be different from those of the Western science? How do we raise technologies for the science? How do we create awareness and promotion for the science? Who are the African scientists? So these are all valid questions, as I say. Okay, even if this is an interesting thing, what use is it practically? So he says, look, I shall attempt to answer these questions, although I am not sure I can fully answer the whys, the whats, the hows, and the wheres, but I do know that I believe in the uniqueness and viability of the science. Believe because I do not have a greater proof beyond what I have written here. In these particular difficult times when African scholars do not see any need for the exercise, they ask, what can African brand of science offer that the Western science cannot offer better? Can any section of African experience be properly called scientific? It is not a waste of time and energy and resources to raise a new science where we already have a viable one. Indeed, it does not make any sense for a typical African intellectual to moot the idea of a unique African science, and by in even greater conviction, there's no need. He's just dismissing. He's like, look, if you're an African, you should just stand by the superstition. And it's like, that's not, again, we're in a world of practicality. So I'll give you guys an example. Here's something like this. Let's say we're going through an agricultural drought, okay? And some people believe that if I pay a man $350 US dollars to dance on my lawn for 20 days, him and his group of people dance on my lawn and party on my lawn for 20 days, that will cause the crops to grow, right? Now, I don't have $350 to give to some dudes to party on my lawn for 20 fucking days, because I could probably do something more meaningful. Maybe I can't do much with $350, or maybe I'll buy a couple of jugs of water and a couple of seeds and a couple of fertilizer, whatever, something like that, right? But the point is that to say, hey, don't dismiss the African, otherwise you're not really a fucking African. Don't dismiss the superstition, otherwise you're not. Like, it's like, come on. It's not to say that the Westerner has a better way. It's to say that you are riding on imagination. You're riding on unverifiable, and you're allowing the con artists to flourish. You're allowing the con, because on a practical level, people will tell you, hey, look, this is our tradition. Pay $350. He's gonna dance on your lawn. Pay $350. He's gonna sleep with your wife, and then your crops are gonna grow. This is our tradition. And it's like, well, wait, hold on a second. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, our tricky question looms large. Why have Western-trained African scientists not been able to invent at least in the same ratio with their Western counterparts? Litany of excuses can be produced in a flash of light, a terrible window dressing. They would blame lack of funding, lack of enabling environment, lack of public and corporate motivation, lack of governmental support. But what of lack of talent? In the days of Soviet socialism, many hopeless men blamed governmental restrictions for their inability to utilize their talents. When, however, the Soviet Union collapsed and they secured their freedom, it came to light that they did not have talents. A Western trained African scientist who had lost his natural African thought system has lost his use of his talent. Talent is something that springs naturally when one thinks within his own native thought system. Losing one's thought system is tantamount to losing one's talent. A great legion of Western trained African scientists successfully emigrated to the Western worlds where they met the diners set on the bed for them, and in working in the same environment with their Western counterparts have still not excelled. They become programmers, lab assistants, research assistants, but never inventors. If we exclude a handful like Philip Emeagwali, the rest are but men who adopt the Western thought system, but who found out they could not think within it. Like the Igbo would say, they became like a man separated from his chi, walking around a mere living dead. A Western trained African scientist who also gave up his African thought system, as most do, and adopted a Western thought system like a Jew in Babylonish captivity. How can he sing his native songs in a strange land? God, who made us African and gave us unique cultures and systems of thought, obviously intended those frameworks to be our working tool. How can the African fare better than the European in his native dance? So again, but this European had the same, like, had a similar theology, or had a theology too, and just dismissed it and put it to the side. So it's just not a good framework to say, hey, look, we as Africans have theology, and the Europeans don't, because they both had theology. Nor can the European outdo the Asian in his native way. How else can the African contribute to the world civilization if he did not do so from his native ways, like the European and the Asians do from theirs? Western trained African scientists are like strangers in their land, and so cannot sing their native songs in a strange land. Highly educated, but lost and essentially useless to the world, except, of course, we choose to call them technicians rather than scientists. We have the Foreign Legion, and then in the Home Legion, but in all, there are but a significant number who knew this fact and retained their native thought system. Philip Emeagwali, the man who invented the internet, is one such African. Um, so apparently this guy is Bob Dole, right? No, I'm joking. I don't know. It was Bob Dole. Who is it? Al Gore. No, I'm just joking. I did mean to look up who this person is, um, and I didn't know what he was attributed with, but apparently the one who invented the internet, which is pretty interesting. Recall that Bill Clinton, a one-time American president, remarked that if Nigeria had as few as 4 scientists who think like Philip Emeagwali, that Nigeria would be on course to become a technological superpower. This probably summarizes our point here. In a country of over 150 million people with millions of scientists, yet not up to 4 of them, possibly no one of them, could think like Philip Emeagwali. Not that the millions of scientists in Nigeria cannot or do not think. They can and they do, but only within Western thought systems. And as this is not naturally genial to them, they simply cannot produce within it. With this, I hope I have made my point that there is a need for a unique African science fit with African thought system where the African scientist looks at nature from his own native way. So again, this was not a good point, but it gives us an interesting name, to say the least. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to look up this guy in the future. You guys can look at who he is at home, um, and if anybody looks him up, put it in the comments. But that's pretty much the only use, like the only interesting thing I've seen in this whole book, actually. Well, not really. I wouldn't say that, but pretty much. Let me take off the highlighter and then yeah, good. So when we walk along the streets in Africa, and actually let me just check the comments. No, nobody's commented on that. But anyway, so when we walk along the streets in Africa, we occasionally bump into a little crowd, now in a market square, then in a street corner, folks who never went to school displaying awesome technological inventions they have made. We can as well mention Abaglaka, the man who was ruined and never given a chance to prove his claim of his invented HIV/AIDS vaccine. The Nigeria Medical Association insisted he must declare his research methods to see if it conformed to Western standards. For them, being Western is more important than results. There is none other viable science besides that of the West, but those he cured are alive today and testifying. What makes people like these excel is because they have never encountered the Western thought system. They think as African and took their state of mind into scientific research. I hope with this little I have explained what unique African science can do for the African scientist and the difference such a discipline would make. Maybe I should comment a little bit further on the later. The 17th, 18th, and 19th century are filled with literature, Hegel, Levi Brule, Hitler, Hume, that discredit Africa for having contributed nothing to the world history and civilization. The claim has never been as true as it is now. an African generated technological invention which offers solutions to some of the world's numerous challenges, which show that African science can make a difference. So, speaking of which, I forgot to say this passage. It's not really an indictment of the Western system um, that only one African is that impressive. Um, it's not that's not an indictment of the Western system. So what is important is to create awareness, because the thing is that most people are not that impressive. You know, like only like you say one guy creates the internet. It's not like a whole bunch of people. White people do have their remarkable scientists, and so do we, but like the remarkable scientists are few and far between. What is important is to create awareness for this science and to promote research and achievement in their discipline. African leaders in politics, academics, and in the corporate world must rise to this challenge. Laws. Oh, actually, I should say for me, for instance, I would have been a pretty impressive physicist if I kept it up. The only thing is that I didn't keep it up, and a large part, and that's the thing. It's like the reality is that um, circumstances are like get in the way of humans. You know, circumstances get in the way of humans. So what is important is to create awareness for this science and to promote research and achievements in this discipline. African leaders in politics, academics, and the corporate world must rise to this challenge. Laws should be passed in legislative houses, making studies as African logic, African numeric system, and science compulsory in our school system. Logic and numeric systems to expose African children early enough to their native thought system, and African science as a platform for such reasoning. So again, he's not really explaining what um, metaphysics he didn't clarify the advantages, but also it doesn't explain how you would go about with a metaphysical rationale, like a metaphysical reasoning. Because like I said, there's con artists everywhere, you know, um, and that's a thing. Like people who can tell you, oh, this is your soulmate, this is your life partner, this is who you should marry or something like that. That's a dime and a dozen. That's a dime a dozen. And if you fall for it, you end up screwing over your life. So anyway, also academic research journals must be floated to publish results arising from this endeavor. In the University of Calabar, we have only recently floated one Philosophia Theoretica and hope it would gain support and acceptance. Research must be encouraged following African methods, and symposia and conferences called for professional interaction. The governments and corporate world must understand the importance of funding research in African science. Besides the great many technological benefits, it is only way we, as dark-skinned people, can assert our existence, take a space in history, and contribute to the world civilization. The significance, and of course, what does that mean? Contribute to world civilization. The significance of this project far exceeds the needs of now. It is a responsibility we owe our posterity. Africans of today suffer discrimination in sport, in their professional careers, and in the various countries of their residence because Africans of the age of science and industrial revolution offered little to humanity that was in agreement with the needs of the time. The fact which Western scholars have interpreted as a proof of the Africans' lack of mind. No African enjoys these racial discrimination, segregation, and dishonor, which we currently suffer around the world. If we fail, therefore, to build our own world now by looking inwards, we may not only have failed ourselves, but which is worse, we might have failed posterity, which would bear the brunt of it. The only way for an African to earn the respect he craves from the rest of the races is to give something to the world, to contribute to humanity's progress. People like Philip Ngwali, Emia Ngwali, constitute isolated rare cases. Let us populate the arena. In Africa, knowledge is play. Let us take this originality into science. So, again, this demand to be fully respected in another person's land is troubling. Now, you want to be respected in your own land, but to be fully respected in another person's land is troubling. Um, you have to get yourself up, but not like inside these weird feel good schemes. So anyway, the African needs not to build the technological basis of his science out of nothing. Interaction has never been a source of harm. The Asians adopted and adapted some technological advances in the West in order to speed up their growth. Africans can do the same. We can borrow or imitate the technology of the West and the Asians in a bid to develop our own. We can build our initial laboratories and design our early tools in this way. What is more, the dark continent may yet rediscover itself anew. So, lastly, he kind of just comes into the realistic world, which is, you know what, you could actually develop on the lines of the West. So I think that should be the end of the book. This is the appendix. So, okay, the appendix is just one page. Yeah, good. All right, so we're just going to read the appendix, and then we'll probably be finished, pretty soon. So he says the appendix, open letter to colleagues, dear colleagues. Preparing this book, my dedication has been a creative work and advancement of knowledge, particularly from an African perspective, and strictly not to renown. In this regard, like every author, I still have a feeling that there might be a few things which I may not have done well, or which could have been done better in this work, but to which, at this preparation of this work, I was not inspired to see. To this end, I call for criticism, suggestions, and recommendations to make better this theory of African science project. Colleagues wishing to send in their thoughts may do so in writing via PO Box, so on and so forth. So, you guys, if you want to contact how this book could be better, just send to this PO Box. And these are some relevant readings. You have Things Fall Apart, which is a literary, which is a regular book. I saw the word arithmetic somewhere here. Foundation of Arithmetic, which is, I guess, a single book. That's pretty much it. About the author. Okay, so this is the brother. Jonathan O holds a bachelor's, MA, and a philosophy degree. A PhD in degrees in philosophy and specialized in mathematical logic, philosophy and science, African philosophy, and philosophy of mathematics. He's a consultant of African studies and thought systems. Currently, he's conducting a broad-based research aimed at mapping out the African psychologics, psychographics, and psychodynamics. He has long years of active experience on research on African culture, people, logic, and science. He has a rational passion for African-oriented research and ideas. Thus, his passion and qualification, in addition to being an African, placed him at the point of advantage to pursue this line of research. Dr. Jonathan hails from Oba, Anambra State, but lives in the serene city of Calabar, South Nigeria, and teaches philosophy and logic as well as history and philosophy of science at the University of Calabar, Nigeria. So that's pretty interesting. This is the index in case you missed anything. And that's pretty much it. That's the book. So appreciate everybody for joining me. I cannot say I'm convinced. I do not like as like there's obviously some merit. I obviously want to look into a certain person. I think his name is Philip. I did want to look into that individual I highlighted. But beyond that, again, I wouldn't call this, like, I wouldn't call the theology science. I think there was a practical purpose for theology once upon a time, but I don't see it today. But other than that, thanks everybody for joining me. I see there's not really much chat, but I appreciate you guys. And this was the Warship. Next week, we'll try to do something different. Let me know what you guys think I should do. Obviously, you can contact me on Twitter. You can contact me on Discord. And if you want, you could read my book preview. I'm working on that right now. So far, I got done with a really big, bloated paragraph. So good things are in the works. Other than that, thank you so much. Shemim Hotep, Aku Jas, and Neb Neb. Amin Ma'at Dua Necher.